Okay, and meeting starts in a few seconds anyway. Yeah, Adam, you were saying you were asking a question about connections.
Collections.
Oh, collections, right?
Yeah,
Sorry.
collections. How how should the BibTeX collections look like in code or in text? Now with the first draft here was kind of a home brew, you know, the square brackets and numbers, but that is not really BibTeX. That's is a homebrew, so we really need a way to enumerate many things. For a single BibTeX entry, it's well defined, but how is it defined for bigger collections like a reference list? Is that really defined?
No, I mean, the part that BibTeX sort of defines is actually what you do with what's in BibTeX. Interestingly, it doesn't really define what BibTeX, the code we see is, because it sort of assumes it's LaTeX. It's also the case that BibTeX as such doesn't, for instance, demand that you escape or accented characters, certainly less unusual ones anyway, except that is all depends on, in a LaTeX context of using the BibTeX, which tool you use to process it. So I deliberately, at the moment, what I tried to do was think, okay, looking beyond the values of everything, if I build something that if somebody ran this through their BibTeX processor, will it crash and burn? If it, you know, because most of these things ignore what they don't use. So for instance, when you make a citation, you say, I don't know, at book, there is basically a style library that then says, oh, take this bit, this bit, this bit, do this to it and put it over here. And depending which style library you're using, it'll just ignore the bits you don't want. So we can actually add extra tags in. That's a sort of blessing. And actually the tag naming is less restrictive than I imagined. But I'm coming to the conclusion that, you know, one of the things we probably want to do is to be putting some basically VM tags in, because if the idea is taken up, it begins to put clear blue water between our carefully considered metadata and some 20-year-old fairly loose-ended system. And it's not that the data that's there is necessarily wrong, but it's badly curated and it's sort of hard to use. So we're going through a pain at the moment, I think, in using BibTeX/LaTeX type of layout. But I think it gets us through the front door more easily. You know, if we just written something, I don't know, in XML or something, I could imagine everyone would be throwing their wax pencils in the air and saying, I can't cope. This sort of gets us through the door by stealth. And I would be very surprised, you know, if this is taken up that in, I don't know, 5 years or more or less, you know, it's transitioned to be a different structure. But that's fine. If this gets us there, it'll be worth the pain, I think.
So you mean that this is what we start with, but we or the community must come up with a more well-defined, maybe a bit different structure for the whole collection thing?
I think we'll want to. The trouble is, if we try and do it now, everything is a potential reason for someone who's on the cusp of adoption to say, no, I won't. I fundamentally disagree, and waltz away. And at the moment, what we want is to find ways that we can basically get our hooks into the system. And once the system's beginning to churn, then we get to stage 2, whereas we can say, look what you're now achieving. Why don't we do some more of this? And once we're past that point, we can start to say, actually, you know, the stuff we did first off is, yeah, a bit hokey. We could probably make this better, because we can then do that without people saying, no, it's impossible. I can't do this. I can't change anything. Because hopefully by this stage, people will see the benefits and they will be engaging with the conversation in a more positive manner. I mean, I'm not suggesting people are being negative. What we're dealing with is a lot of people who haven't seen this before and don't get it. And we have to be, I think, we're honest with ourselves. A lot of people just won't understand it from the description alone. So not until they've seen it washed through the thing, probably will a penny drop. Well, that's just, you know, the different people see things different ways.
So hi guys. Adam just asked Mark, that we're a bit early, about collections of BibTeX things, excuse me, of these documents, Meta and so on. But before we get going, Rafael, how are you feeling? You better? You're good.
Yeah, doing good. Thank you.
Peter, how are you doing? And how is your dad doing?
Well, he had to have some additional stitches put in, but it looks like the bleeding's finally under control.
Oh, that's good. That's very stressful.
Yeah, but it's been a huge time sink.
Could imagine. Can imagine. Adam, I guess you asked the question because you're dealing with Mark's database of this to do the visualizations, right? So it becomes an issue of how the collections exist. Is that the reason for? Hi, Alan. Adam was just asking about collections of these documents.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt the flow, but very quickly, what do you mean by collections in this case? And we talk about the ACM documents, or?
I think, Adam, it would be useful if you elaborate and clarify the question to begin with to answer Adam and me at once.
This was mostly about the metadata, the section. There are many things that are collections in the metadata that is not a single BibTeX entry identifying the paper and the authors, but all the references, the headings, and additional details about the papers.
Gotcha. Arrays, like essentially arrays of
some sort of list arrays or something, and that is a bit tricky in BibTeX from my point of view. I've just glanced at it and I've never been. It feels more tied to the latest standard than. So it can be a bit complicated, and I'm not really sure if BibTeX is really the vehicle for doing this, because it doesn't have all those facilities, or not easily. It's hard to use them, and I wonder if there is any actual use case for having them in BibTeX. The references in the metadata section, is it really useful to have it? For now, it could be, of course, given Mark's reasoning before, but should it be in a different kind of format, a list? Because I can't see the use case. You won't import the references in your reference manager. Usually, I think you import the paper reference when you cite it, but the papers it references is a bit different, I think, and the same goes for having the abstracts in the reference list. It's a quick way of viewing the abstracts, but that can be extracted elsewhere, I think. So what I'm proposing for the long term is to use something that is more structured for collections.
So when you say collections now, you mean at the end of the document, for instance, there's a reference section referring to?
Many things, yes.
Yeah.
A collection of references.
So the question is how to store that.
Yeah.
And why not store it as each one has its own BibTeX?
Yes, you can do that, but you need to have some sort of wrapper around that, to say that this is a collection of references. It should be machine readable, not just human readable, because when you look at it as a reader, you will see that it's a collection. But how can the machine know that this is a collection and what this collection is about?
So what we've been working on this week with that is trying to super simplify this for the ACM and make it very clear. So we have this page here on the Visual Meta website so the introductory text is just text, of course. So Visual Meta start, Visual Meta end, that's simple. But within that, we have the header, which is what we've gone through many times. And then this is really, really important for adoption. The BibTeX about the document has to be, at least in the beginning, copy paste from what they already have, no work for them, except for maybe the VM ID, if they agree to put that in. So to refer to your question, in the Visual Meta extension section bits, this is where, as we've discussed, making it crystal clear what author information is, but also now, and now we're getting to what you're talking about, references.
And authors, of course, that is also a collection of different people.
Yes, exactly. So this is, in some scientific papers, of course, there'll be a lot of people, but it is author one, first name, middle name, whatever is possibly useful, plus any kind of other identifiable information, even email if they're willing to give that, which often papers have, of course, an organization at the time they were submitting the documents. So actually, I'll skip to that in a second, but what Jacob and I did this week, we just simplified the way we show headings. It's more verbose. So it says the heading that has the text abstract is heading level 1. And this one further down, which is a level 2 heading, which the name of it is Nick Montfort. Actually, the author was Nick Montfort as well. So it becomes the same parsing logic as we have for everything else. So
While you're there, could you change that to, now it says level and then level 2 in as a, to me it feels more natural, maybe because I programmed to not have to just say level 2, 1 or 2. Yeah. And also here I would like to have the page if possible, because that is a way to reverse search this list, that if you are on a page and want to know something about the headers, you don't have to traverse the whole document in sequence to know if introduction is for, there could be multiple introductions, as I've said before, and multiple further reading, one for each chapter, for example. So you need to do a,
I think that the gain we get for this rather painful thing of doing it in sort of what looks like BibTeX is simply that it enables us to use BibTeX that we know is floating around in the wild and gives us a kickstart. You know, if we were to build this whole thing from the ground up in some other thing, we'd have the whole problem of how we port the BibTeX references into it. I mean, and we probably will do that down the line. I just think it might be just more than some people can stomach at this point. So it means the other side of it, the non-reference parts, look a bit hokey at the moment. And another really interesting thing that came up this week, because Fred was asking me about, we had an interesting round the houses about in effect what you're doing with the citation. And it appears that although when originally designed BibTeX, the pages tag was supposed to be where in the document you were citing, it's actually mainly been misunderstood, misused by people as being, for something like a paper, the start and the ending page number, which is a different thing, because unless you're literally citing the whole document rather than part within it. Now there is a cross-references way hidden away and not much used and really badly documented. There is a method where you can use BibTeX and you can, for instance, cite a paper, and then you could have 5, 8 different citations within that paper to a particular point. This is interesting because I know this is what Freud wants to do in context with, you know, author and reader. And going forward, I think it's really powerful. I'm not sure how well it integrates with the status quo at the moment. It sort of works on paper. We're all used to seeing, you know, IBID and then a number and stuff. But actually, in the sort of nascent part digital, part paper systems we have at the moment, I don't think it's particularly well done. And most good referencing you'll see will have probably been done by hand at some point, unfortunately. But you know, then again, I think we're in a position that by not over forcing this, of actually bringing the best of what there was in the print age and putting it into the digital age without us, you know, basically doing lots of, you know, rear view thinking. Because we also need to allow for the fact that, you know, soon a larger number of documents will have no page-based canonical form.
I don't agree with you, Mark, on the pages will go. I don't agree with you at all. If that was going to happen, then EPUBs would have taken off a long time ago. But page layouts do have many useful functions. So I think it is, very useful to have.
I'm not suggesting it doesn't. No,
But
forgive me.
useful
Also,
enough that I don't think we're heading in a direction that will mean less and less page layout and more free-flowing text. I don't think we're seeing that beginning to happen, and I don't think it will happen.
but I think we need. The point is, we need to start thinking for the fact that even if it's not everything that will occur, because if I read a book in a Kindle, and I know that's not an academic text, but nonetheless, if I read a book in a Kindle, I have no idea what page I'm on. I think I can find a thing that tells me, but because I read it with the text in big and so I don't have to wear these, what page I'm on is not, I'm only looking at part of a page
Mark,
anyway.
So in terms of the discussion today, visual meta is for PDF. And we're stressing with ACM now. So I think we should kind of stay focused on that. When it comes to EPUB and so on, Kindle, Amazon, all that stuff, they have their own proprietary stuff. And the fact that it is proprietary, I think is criminal. But I see it as a competitive advantage because they have the WhisperSync technology. So you can listen to the book and read it and it's all connected. So I have actually been in touch with some of the people at Kindle about this. And they're just very politely giving me the middle finger and say, buzz off. We don't care about the greater good in this context.
Can I just throw in a quick 2 cents worth from an outsider's perspective? And this is outside of the formats of Kindle or whatnot. It's just very quickly that I store a lot of PDFs. I start reading the PDFs and I stop reading them because of the page breaks. I stop reading them because I can't highlight, or it's difficult or janky to highlight from one page to the next. And that alone, that is the major factor that prevents me from reading in PDF format. So if anything can be done to reduce that, not get rid of page layout or anything, but I mean, that's just the reality. I want so badly to read these white papers in a format that is friendly to me.
Yeah, but that's an interaction issue. I mean, as the designer of Reader, I could imagine you do a highlight. If you hit the bottom of a page, and just hover for a minute, it'll then go to the next page where you can keep selecting and it logically knows they're connected. I don't think that's inherent in having page layout. That's an issue.
That's true. That would be a step in the right direction. That happens sometimes, but primarily it's the same a rational reminder. And this is a UX thing, I admit, but that when I start to select, that suddenly I'm jumped over to somewhere else, when to me it's a continued thought, and it should be thusly continued. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that.
I think it's actually a big and worthwhile point. I mean, one thing that today I've actually been quite depressed, to be honest, and stressed and angry. It's been building up for a while because, as some of you know, the concept is a thing that obviously we have an author. You have the concept map. Concept map, we all kind of know what it is. But in the beginning of my thesis, and Mark has been helping me a bit today, I want to put down the simple thing of what text does for a human. It takes something from here and puts it there in a way that you yourself later or someone else can take back, right? The things that you do that with, we don't even have a fully recognized language. I mean, in my anger today, I went to a bookshop and bought another stack of books, there's to try just to find what do we call it? I mean, reading this book that I've recommended to you guys before, he used the term engram.
Actually, could you show up that book plus the ones you just bought? I'm going to do a screenshot of all of those because I think the Michael Ashcroft is doing a book club for Master and Emissary. Oh, and so you've got the one over to the right is Super Intelligence. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, because it talks about an engram in here. An engram is apparently the brain science word for the physical place in your brain where where memory is stored, which of course is very, lots of stuff behind that. But just to be able to say the point of having text, at least in an academic context, is to get something out of your head that someone else can understand. but in a frozen form, not speech. That has a different thing. So I want to use the term concept, right? Because obviously I'm developing software for concepts. For me, it makes sense. But what really makes me angry about our species is the fact that there isn't, to use an Anderson term, like a canonical reference where I can say what writing does. It takes a thought that is all mushy in the human head and puts it in a visible form. And when I say form, I literally mean a form, because text cannot hold everything. It doesn't have the tone of voice and lots of things that isn't there, of course. So it is a shape. It's like literally a bucket, right? But it is a bucket of clarity as well. So it helps clarify something. I know this is really fundamental, but when
It helps clarify, but it's also sometimes a placeholder, a tag, an alias. Like it doesn't contain the thing that's in here nearly as much as it says, I need to remember this thing for later. Anyway, go ahead.
No, but that is the whole point, because text in itself contains nothing, right? It is only a visual, symbolic means through which you access the reader's memory of related things. I mean, let's say you are 10 years old and you read something about sex. There's nothing in your mind to understand what that is. You may understand a physical description, but you haven't evolved your body to understand that stuff. So if you don't have a context, the text has no meaning, obviously, right?
Right.
But even to have a language to describe, because one of the things Mark and Christopher Guttridge at Southampton, we've been discussing a few years ago that I think is so important, is an academic document is the act of taking multiple points of thought things and putting it in a linearized form, because you have to make an academic insertion of some sort. So it freezes that, and then it has to be gone back out again. But just to go in my own, trying to now to please my supervisors and the powers that be, to be able to write that down, and not just in a conversation like we're having here, but in a more academic, cited manner, I'm finding it hugely impossible to write what text does for this. Really weird. Mr. Anderson, you have a hand up.
Yeah, because I didn't want to sort of squash on what you were saying, but it's to pick up, well, to link to something that Alan said, this point about, highlighting and things, because something else that came up in conversation between Fred and myself during the week was, so, if I've got information and I want to, and I have this document locally, I have this PDF and I want to go to, I know I want to go to page 40 or logical page 40, because there's a difference between the pagination in the document and the printed pagination on the digital page. But even that, so I know what page I want to go to, but I don't necessarily have the means to find the right place in the PDF, because that seems to involve metadata or structure in the PostScript side of things that we don't necessarily get at. But to me, this also loops around to this point about the highlighting and things. And one of the things it says to me is something we want to evolve while we're still sort of in the PDF world, is this idea of basically having a clean textual extraction. So no page numbers, no headers, no footers, because a machine wants that for machine learning. And actually, we want it for things like just being able to extract something across a page boundary and not get the page number and all sorts of other dreck just brought along for the fun. And these sort of things I don't think were ever thought about in the early days of PDF, or if they were, I don't think they've been very well brought forward in the design. But I don't think there's anything to say it can't be. And another positive thing that may come out of what we're doing with all this visual meta is to help bring some of these things in the foreground. I mean, I'm sure they're very solvable problems. It's just sort of getting enough people deciding that, yeah, it's about time we solved it.
Yeah, I mean, yes, PDF is messy, no question about that. But anyway, it's just,
It is
yeah, go on, sorry.
well, just to empathize with what you were saying for a moment ago, kind of hopscotching around. Anyway, yeah, it's incredibly difficult to talk about what text does with the brain, and it's even there's still unexplored territory of like the relationship between writing and software. A lot of ways it's the eye of the storm. Writing is somehow so fundamental to our executive functions or something that we don't think of writing or written artifacts the same way we think of everything else in the world, because it's so close to us. And that's much like in the eye of the storm. I think that has led to a lack of evolution to writing because it is so close to us or something. It's like the car that we're driving in is an extension of ourselves. But that said, and I know I jumped in late and I'm only here periodically. It sounds to me like with the emails going back and forth that there's a lot of urgency around particular technical issues. And I'd love to know where that's at. And like, it seems like, Adam, are you doing most of the heavy lifting on putting this in place? Like,
I'm not really doing anything at the moment.
okay.
I'm on vacation. This is mostly Frode and Mark here. And for my visualizations, I've been using Mark's data. It's mostly in the hope that having visual meta in the end of PDF documents, that we can automate the fact gathering to create visualizations. Okay. So, gotcha. And I'm maybe the programmer voice in the room, one of them, to get the humanists in check.
Gotcha. Well, so yeah, that was kind of putting on a product manager hat just then to make sure that like there's all these, everybody here is so interesting with the ideas, but is the project itself going well?
Well, it depends how you look at it. So Jacob is working on updating author and reader so that we have a living round trip on this stuff. And Adam and Mark and Peter is also working on a parser. The link that I put in the chat is the current up-to-date, this is what visual meta is, so that anybody can refer to it. So some of the problems is I'm now feeling very much, it's an amazing opportunity to work with ACM, but I have an impression from the emails that they're a bit concerned about whether this is too much work for them. I'm also reading between the lines that this may be a bit intrusive. Why don't they do it themselves? I had a meeting with my advisor this week, and so what I've told ACM in many different ways is the basic of visual meta is the BibTeX of the document itself. It's copy and paste, super simple. There is a little bit of other stuff that can be a boilerplate that we would have to agree with them, so we don't just put in text they don't like. But something as simple as headings, or basic seeming as headings, is something that I'm trying to push gently on, because it would have to be manually made. But what I have found from author reader is that when you do a lot of operations on the text, knowing where the headers are is really, really useful. So if you do a find and you see that what you have found is under a certain heading, it's clearly different from what's under another heading. When you do basic machine learning things like show me all the names in the documents, having headings for that too is very useful. When you fold to see the headings, to see where your notes are, just like you were talking about, there also, it's really useful to have headings for context. So, like Mark was saying right before you came in, I think it was, it's one thing to dictate to them to make it easy, but at the same time, it needs to be a dialogue so that they get the right thing, get something that actually fits what they're trying to do. So
yeah, that's great that you're questioning that, like that you're being critical of it. I definitely am curious myself as to how close or how critical this ACM initiative is to the larger goals, your larger goals and the group's larger goals.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, by the way, did you see the Battlefield 2042 reveal yesterday?
No.
Okay, it's relevant. Trust me, I'm not just going on a geek wank here. So Battlefield, one of the top first-person shooter systems, PlayStation, Xbox, everything. They are coming out with a new version in a couple of months, and it's very exciting in and of itself. But yesterday they showed something they call Portal, where the end user can build almost anything they want. If you want to have World War II German soldiers only armed with knives up against a tank, a modern tank, you can do that. Right? So you can just go crazy. If you want to be able, buildings can be blown up. A hand grenade on the ground, it deforms the ground. These are so richly interactive environments, and not just passively from someone running through, but you can also script the things now. So instead of just saying headshots are now 3 times damage, you can also do things that in certain conditions, because it's a visual scripting language where you move things about. Let's say the tower falls down. If that happens, then have a storm. Right? It's
Right.
absolutely
Yep.
incredible. So my absolute dream for visual meta is that it allows concepts, and this is why I'm really stressed about concepts these days, the human thing that fits in text to have relatable meaning. And the conveyor of this relatable meaning today are the documents. Those are the vessels they float around in. They are the addressable units. So what visual meta has to do, and this is why it's great to see Adam's visualization based on Mark's data, is there are many ways you can see how it relates. So Bertrand Russell, one of the things he pointed out, and obviously this is before computers, is if you can look at information in 2 different ways, like binoculars, you get a much richer view of what it is.
Yeah.
So if we don't allow us as a human species to have the same level of interaction between objects that you can have in a run and gun shoot 'em up, we're going to be controlled by all the negative sides of too much information.
Before we skip, I see Peter's got his hand up before we skip too far along.
Yeah, Peter, please. That was a bit of a tirade.
Okay, I put a few links in the chat.
Yeah,
The
well done,
first
they're
one-
great.
First one is to a new system that just dropped called Nebulous, which allows you to run a local copy of the interplanetary file system on your own machine to generate hashes so that you can locally create the hash that would be created were the document to be uploaded to the file system without uploading it. So you can privately now exchange documents using the hashes from the IPFS. That suggests that that might be a better tool for our visual meta IDs than trying to just take part of an author's name or the date, because in this case, you could just drop the entire original ACM copyrighted PDF onto the system, get the hash created locally for you, and then use that hash, which means if anybody finds a copy of it with or without visual meta attached, you'd be able to identify that document uniquely, again, without the document being out in the cloud or anything, just simply, we now have the unique agreed upon hash that's used by that system. Then we could use that same hash as a way to upload to IPFS if we wanted or not, externally supplied visual meta. So now imagine that you make the visual meta file name be the hash of the original source file plus .vm or vmeta as an extension on it. And then that file could contain the visual meta, and that could be dropped into the file system. So again, if someone has the source document, they can find the unique content addressable name of our visual meta associated with it, and then pull that from wherever it is without having to know where it's actually located, which I think would be a big win. The next set of links I put were to some of Roger Shank's work talking about memory structures, and that might help you, Frode, if you take a look at it. The book, the first time is the book, Connoisseur's Guide to the Mind, where Shank talks a lot about how we learn new things and how that relates to our need for existing hooks to scaffold it out on. That might help you there. And then the next 2 references are more specifically getting into some of the memory structures that he was talking about growing out of his conceptual dependency theory work in terms of memory organization, packets, frames, and scripts. So that might be helpful to you in getting language to use. We could use the memory organization packet language, or frames possibly might be a good word for our concepts. But anyhow, there might be some hooks there. The next thing I wanted to mention was that I just discovered that the parser generator that I was using has been unsupported for a while, and it's been forked under a new name. So now I'm redoing my grammar to be using the correct currently maintained version of the parsing generator, which now has a plugin that can produce TypeScript compatible parsers, which I think would be a big win because people operating in the JavaScript space are moving more and more to TypeScript infrastructure. So I'm going to try to shift my tooling in that direction. It'll be a little bit long because, again, I lost a huge amount of time driving my dad in to the oral surgeon a couple times this week and all. But as soon as I have that working, I'll share that code with you. And let's see. I think that brings us up to where we are in the conversation.
Thank you.
Very good.
Adam has his hand up as well.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, but go with it, Alan.
No. I was just going to do a summary of what I just heard and addendums.
Yeah, one thing that I think is in a bit unresolved here is how we handle errors in Visual Meta and problems with Visual Meta. I think you Frode, have the big hope that appending a Visual Meta will make my visualizations a lot easier, and I don't think that is true in a first step. I think we always need a kind of a mark in between, a Mark Anderson that cleans up the data. Whenever you're working with with user submitted data, the absolute reality of it is that fields will be misfiled. They will have so many errors and missing things that we can't really expect, even for professionals working with working at Sheridan or ACM or 100 different other organizations. If Visual Meta takes off, there will be enormous amount of errors in the data, and we really need a way to take that data and clean it up to be able to trust it in some reasonable way. And I think that is unresolved, and you haven't really addressed it enough, Frode. That is why I'm almost only advocating having an identifier and a very, very simple metadata section attached to the paper, because it will be wrong, and having bad data is almost worse than having no data, because then you may assume that it's right.
Are you primarily talking about the visual meta that refers to the inside of the document, or that sites outside of the document?
Both of them. I've noticed so many errors in the published BibTeX entries and inconsistencies. Some use dashes, some use double. So there are 100 ways of, even if we as humans understand them, in most cases machines won't understand them. And I know exactly why and what will fail and what is missing and what is not escaped and so on. Escaping and the outer format can be solved just by validating it, but the human information is really not solved, and this is
okay. So right, so Adam, the way that I look at it is that there's two types of metadata in this context. One of them is the citing metadata, which is the author's names, which has issues we've discussed over the last few weeks, title and date primarily, of course some other stuff. That's something that the author, being an individual or an organization, has to actually enter. No question about that. Can there be an error there? Can someone spell their own name wrong? Of course it can happen. Not super likely, but yes, it can happen. And if we expect it to take off, we have to keep that in mind. The other data I call retained structural data. So for instance, the headings. The idea is not that someone sits and hand codes that. In Author, for instance, it automatically adds that because someone has made headings on the document. So as long as for something like that, it is properly described by us, and this is why Mark being a complete pain is very useful, because the things you said about, oh, is it an M dash or a dash dash or a double or whatever it is, that has to be both made clear in the documentation, and the systems have to be flexible enough to to understand that these things mean the same. I mean, believe it or not, and this call is recorded, I'm talking to some very wonderful people here, but it was only yesterday, and this is me having looked at BibTeX for years now, that it fully came to me that in the data, you can either have quotes or curly brackets or some other thing. It doesn't matter. So for something that fundamental, the system doesn't give a monkeys. But, you know, using page, you know, Mark and I spent a whole day fighting over what that meant yesterday. It's absolutely ludicrous. So for something like that, that should also be retained structural data. So if you copy from a document that has visual meta, paste it in a word processor, that copy should contain the logical page. You know, page 1 of the PDF, no matter what it says written at the bottom of the page, right? So that shouldn't really have an opportunity for an error when that goes in the references.
But that is not true in reality when we have 10 different implementations and 2 different views on if the page is referring to a logical page or printed page or something else, or extracted page if you have individual paper extracted from a volume and so on. So there are many things that I think you are.
No, you're absolutely right. I just want to show you that this is what, for that particular issue, this is where Mark and I are at this point. If you can look at my screen, it says in the references at the back of the document, we will do the page and all that stuff in BibTeX, but we have invented page cited equals. So I have nothing wrong with, for the things that the systems that support this could automatically add, and that's humanly understandable and can be described to be put on top. I have no problems with that at all.
But and that page cited, is that referring to the PDF page or the printer number in the bottom? And if someone appends an extra page before?
I can answer that. A really core thing about visual meta is that somebody produces a PDF into the world, publishes it. That is opened by a PDF reader that understands visual meta. When you copy from that, you copy and it will count page 1 as page 1. It will not read with machine learning what's at the bottom of it. And if you modify it, it's a new document. It's a new thing. So it just means logical or physical or however people refer to a page. Right, but these, you know, your questions are obviously valid, but remember that the basic visual meta interaction, is based on a published document. Someone copies and pastes it into a new one, so errors should not be able to creep in as long as it was published correctly.
But that has never been the case, is what my point. That we have so many standards, existing standards and existing formats where lots of error creep in and form. You know, you published a future of text PDF. Then the metadata and many things are problematic there because links are not working and so on. And that is for someone who knows it, and links should work because you have looked at it. That is a reality of thing. And I'm not really.
That's something else. Some of the links in Future of Text was made in InDesign. InDesign has weird ways to export to PDF. If a link is written out www blah blah blah, it will work. Click on it and you go. If someone has an embedded link, that doesn't work. Right? That is.
But what will Sheridan work with, and what will the 100 different publisher work with, and the individual? They will work in InDesign, and some will work in a Word export, and someone will do it automated, and someone will have an error. So we will have many errors creeping into this. It's totally unrealistic to think that computer-generated things are not error-free.
No, we have to be glass half full a bit. I hear what that means.
It's not going to be error-free at all. I'm not saying that, but there are ways to do error handling that, you know, that's the reason, you know, that's part of the parsing, right? I'm not saying it's a trivial problem, but what I am saying is that, you know, this is already difficult enough. Of course, we have to take these things into account, but I'm not just going to throw my hands in the air and say it just can't be done. And also, we're literally doing it to the best of our abilities. I mean, don't forget that the basics of visual meta is just this. It's just, this is what this document is.
Yeah, but that paper is for you or for a human usually, and what you're designing is a thing for automated systems mostly, as I understand it. If visual meta is just for humans to copy paste from, then it's fine. They can fix it when they're copy pasting, and but for fully more automated workflows, this will break in 100 different ways, and this is still completely or very unaddressed by
I think
our
Alan has a point.
document. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like
Sorry.
to jump in here because this is, I'm really glad you're bringing this up. And to back up a little bit and kind of maybe look at all the themes that have been talked about. What I hear are points that are very valid, going from different motivations, different assumptions. I think what might be really useful is to kind of lay out our assumptions about the world as it is, and then even the desires, the places of inflection, right? And then from there kind of align on what, as fancy ways of whatever, maybe saying, you know, here's a 2x2 grid, where's the best place to focus, right? Because Adam, your points are totally dead on. If the goal may be that this is a new protocol that's going to replace all previous protocols, et cetera. And I think the point and the theme behind it is like, that's not really realistic. And in many ways, you know, a version of that may not be realistic. So is the goal, maybe the goal is like, hey, we want to make a point of inflection this way with this new format that people can choose if they decide to go that way. And it's kind of a soft passive adoption. And then there's the other angle of, hey, I think that, you know, the concepts and the concept mapping that, hey, if there was actually a new way to experience PDFs, in addition to just this new kind of format that made it more compelling to use this new way, then that would increase adoption. So to summarize, I feel like we, you know, all five of us and even more in the larger group are looking at this very complicated problem from different angles, which can be boiled down to where this is the real world right now. How do we get to 0.01, right? And the other half is probably like, I don't know what the world I want it to be, but I know that here's a break point in that in order to get to that world. And so I'm going to start with this vision and then figure out how to insert it into the system, right? Top down, bottom up. But yeah, has that talk happened? Has that been, do you feel like there's a strong alignment?
I think it's a fair point you're making. And before Mr. Anderson and, oh yeah, you have your, it comes back. I'd just like to ask Adam, having asked, saying that this hasn't been addressed, this kind of midpoint, so to speak, how do you think we should address it? In what manner?
Which point? The point that errors will inevitably be there in large amounts if this is widely adopted.
Yes, that one.
I think it's in. I think it's unrealistic to expect that data that goes into published documents will be correct, and we have to. I think that is it will be very incomplete and very wrong in some cases, and conflicting versions will exist that are not that we're not able to parse without humans in the loop. That is my real point here. So we need some sort of mark in the loop here, doing database work, and many people in the loop.
There are other ways to handle it than just cleaning the data, but it is not agreed that cleaning the data, doing what Mark has done, is the most surefire way to do it. There are other ways to intervene in the system.
You mean at an earlier point, or require better data
right now,
from users?
The only way to do it is manual. But like if the goal were to say, hey, we want to reduce errors in PDFs, you would then work on a smarter PDF reader, right? Rather than another platform. or rather than another protocol, right? You'd say, I've got this PDF reader that uses machine learning, whatever, and can fix all this and fix the quotation marks. And that would be your point of trajectory. Sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I agree. So did that answer your question, Frode? My point is that we can't really solve the human problem here, that humans will not fill in forms, and they will not fill in forms correctly. We can't solve that, and we can't wish it away, and we need to handle it, and
Right.
not by magic. We can't expect parser to be magic. We can't expect machine learning to come and save us, but they can do some things. But
Okay.
yeah, so that is
Right. So first of all, we can't expect machine learning to do a little bit. I mean, I drive a Tesla. It can take a messy video feed and take a correct left turn. So if it can do that, chances are it can figure out that a hyphen should actually be an M dash. So some of that can be done, but I'm not saying magic machine learning AI will take over and everything will be fine. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that Peter's suggestion last week that to have an errata, I can't even pronounce it, an errata kind of section fits with this. The original visual meta design does have a page 2. And in page 2, that is designed to be modified. That's a page where you can write, I have highlighted this, I've highlighted that, so it's machine readable elsewhere. It can also be used in an organization to show which user has read this document. You clicked OK and all of that stuff. So it's designed to be changed. That would also be a good place to have, if Mark reads a document, finds errors, he should be able to, through whatever interface is appropriate, say, I believe this is wrong, and that goes in that page. But your issue, Adam, is really, really deep and important. I talked about concepts earlier and how I'm having a stressful time of dealing with concepts to text. That is exactly the same thing I believe you're talking about. In one of the key things, I don't have the book in front of me, and I'm not going to ask my wife to go running, but Bertrand Russell, he wrote this whole big philosophical book on human knowledge, and he ended the book with human knowledge is messy, and we will never be able to get away from that. So my answer to that, your question really is, we need to provide mechanisms to be able to interact with the data. That really is what it is. So if it is supporting a Mark Anderson, going through document by document and putting it on a separate page, that's one way. But I may not trust Mark Anderson, so I don't want to mess with the original. So that's why having this extra page is a good idea. I may also think of Mark Anderson as a DJ. If he says something is cool, I want to read it. So I'm not at all dismissing your concern. What I'm saying is that right now, I'm feeling the weight on my shoulders of making ACM feel like this is piss easy, to say it in a jokey way, but it will introduce some level of robustness and data that we don't have. So I think your concern is super important, and I think maybe we should have a separate channel for it, like let's say on Mondays or something, because it is a very kind of negative and stressful thing, but it is very important and honorable that you bring it up. It just shouldn't stop us moving forward.
Well, my sense is that I'd always prefer to have more data, even if it isn't confident data, than to not to have the data at all. So even if you just had, a confidence level equals with a value attached to things as an optional metadata that you could put in. So maybe I'm very sure of almost all of my references, but there's one that I'm seriously dubious on, but it's the best I can get my hands on. And if authors creating papers could flag that, I know it goes against the notion that we're not supposed to submit a paper for publication unless we have absolutely everything rock solid, 100%, stake your life and your degree on it, confidence. We should be more realistic and think about how humans really work and provide that hook for you to have an indication that you're not all that sure. And then maybe that might even encourage another reader to go and probe more deeply into that area, which could provoke them to go off and do a paper and link to it. So it wouldn't take much just to have just like a little extra field, just a confidence level field.
Yeah, in the confidence level field, that is actually something important we've added, but we haven't really addressed it enough. And that is in the intro bit, in what we now call header, sorry, it actually says the name of the software and version, the name of the, the version of Visual Meta, but it also says the organization. So that already gives you a huge clue as to what errors it may contain. Mark showed me that Springer, for instance, does names backwards in BibTeX compared to other organizations, which is annoying, but once you know that, you can parse for that. So once you know this is an official ACM document, the system can know what ACM does differently. So that also goes towards it.
Oh, very good. Because one of the
Right.
problems with BibTeX is it is a relatively permissive format, and you have
Very
a whole series of subsets of discourse communities that are all sort of talking in generic BibTeX, but it's more like a little pigeon version of the dialect that each one has. It's a little bit different.
yeah.
That's just brilliant having the organization hook in there.
Yeah, so the whole thing of some people want to organize knowledge, fine. I'm not interested in that. I really am not. I'm interested in providing users with the means through which they can organize themselves in their knowledge, as my teacher said when I was getting my master's. And that means give us enough data, give us enough dimensions of the data, so we can determine where to go next, what to trust, etc. So I think that is beginning to address Adam's question. What do you think, Adam?
No, but that's a long discussion. I don't think it's because we're trying to fix humans here. It's not about this.
Well,
It's the humans that are the problems, that they do not fill in the forms correctly. They don't care enough, and that is
Okay,
even
so-
for professionals that work with it. When the publisher hires some Indians working night and day doing layout work, copy pasting BibTeX entries, and expecting that to work, because that is a reality, I think,
but
at least from what I've seen.
To make a kind of a joke about it, if everybody uses my software, we'll be fine.
Yep, but they won't.
No, exactly, right? But that is why I think it's really important that when you read the Visual Meta, it says what software produced it. So you can choose what level of trust to put in it, and you may have learned, or the system may have learned, that this software produces consistent errors in this area, and you fix it based on that. Right, so all I really think we can do is to do the best darn demo, real world demo as we can, and try to inspire others to follow. Adam, excuse me, Alan, you wrote a thing.
Oh, well, Mark was ahead in line.
Well, I can probably anyway address that question, because what I was going to do is try and pull things together. Because I mean, and to put a bit of pragmatism into it, because although I appear to have been spent lots of time fiddling with the minutiae of BibTeX, it's partly getting at what Peter's just said. You know, actually, it's a very, very permissive system, and everyone's actually using their own dialects. But it is the sort of Babel language we have at the moment, and it's our Trojan horse to get us in and started. So I take a very pragmatic view, and I'm sort of very much I don't really fit in either the pure humanist or the pure technical camp. And having been a sort of emergency information plumber, I recognize the messiness of the situation. And again, drawing on doing process change in sort of difficult organizations in the past, half the thing is to get your beachhead in there. And I think if we get as far as even just this year, ACM taking even very bare bones Visual Meta, and in a form that we may all decide after the event wasn't the right one, we'll still be ahead, because it's creating the hook to do all the various things we mentioned. I mean, I very much understand the points that Adam is raising. And so one of the things I've sort of really been trying to work out is, well, how much can we expect from the BibTeX, which I only see as a handhold to get us to the point where something either emerges, something else that exists is proven to be better, or like us not, enough people are saying, seriously, we need to do better. That's fine. That's a good thing, because if we do that, we'll be doing it with the knowledge of the messiness of what we have at the moment. But I really do think that, so I'm less worried that it all looks a bit rinky-dink at the moment, because, you know, if we get into ACM this year, like ACM and Web Science are together next year, and I'm sure Dame Wendy will want to push for it, you know, and so we've also been slightly distracted by the need to do this. You know, Freud's had this sort of deadline to do stuff for ACM, so it's brought it to the fore. And I know it's confusing that we've been doing these visualizations stuff, but one of the reasons we were tinkering around with it was to give a sort of vision of what might be. So part of the pretense is, if you had visual meta of whatever kind that gave you the richness of this data set that you could literally just pull out without having to reprocess it, look at all the cool stuff you can do. Because some people really need to see that. They just can't imagine it. They have to be shown it. So there is actually no relevance in a way to my ACM data set, except that it's allowed us to do the visualization, that's allowed us to show people who like to see things that, look, this is the kind of stuff visual metadata will do for us.
But can we half promise that, or even like remotely promise that? Because I feel that it could be very false to say that we can do the visualizations when I think it's quite impossible to get to 100 papers and expect the fields to be right.
I hear what you say, and you make kind comments about the cleanliness of the data, but this is where the pragmatism comes in. You know, I mean, to get to the sunny uplands eventually, we're going to have to go through some really boggy patches. But I just think we have to, you know, accept that pretty much everything for quite some while is going to fall short. You know, someone in the room will be able to say, this is rubbish. I think, you know, it's never going to work. Well, it isn't working yet, but it will work. And I don't see a better alternative at the moment, in the sense that certainly the academic citation tree, you know, here we are in the 21st century, and you can't even, with any ease, actually outside very, very small domains, with any ease, look at, you know, these information maps that we all say we want. So my approach is, okay, well, let's just bloody get on with it. It'll look messy to start with, but if we concentrate too much on the big problems, we'll stop ourselves going forward. So I'm not trivializing in any way, shape, or form the issues you're raising, because I have skin in the game enough to know that whilst I'm not a coder, I'm very, very aware of all these issues about things like machine reading. But I've funnily enough, I feel remarkably hopeful at the moment. I mean, because I think if we get past the thing of, you know, this ACM trial, it will just give us something to build on. There's a lot to build out, and I think Alan's point is right, that one of the things we probably want to do is to start to draw together the sort of the meta picture of where all these angles intersect, and to sort of do this project management type of thing of saying, okay, well, you know, where do we need to put the sticking plaster first? You know, stuff will be leaking out all over, but we can't do it all. So, you know, which gives us the biggest win?
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna have to jump in a minute, but I just wanted to, and I don't know the academic world, but I want to put on, regrettably, my sales cap, or things that I've learned in sales, even though I don't consider myself a salesperson by any stretch. And that is, the client is really not often going to make a move or go with the product unless there's a compelling event, right? Because there's no pain or there's no penalty in keeping things the way they are, right? And so my question would be, treating them as a client for a moment. You know, what do they have to lose? What questions, or what potential gain do they get out of this? And what is their compelling event? I don't need answers for that. I'm just kind of putting that out as something to think about, because that maybe helps, you know, in the machine learning parlance, sort of like change your weights a little bit, right? When I think about it from their perspective, then not, and making the assumptions that I have, it could be that they're actually visionaries and they want to embrace, they want to be on the forefront of information traversal. But if they are institutionally minded, maybe what they want ultimately is just a little extra widget sidebar that helps people do X, right? And if they just have that little bit of an advance, they will be thrilled, because they'll get like 2 people will say, oh, I really liked that thing, and versus, hey, we're going to try out this new format for all of our text and see if people like it. Like, no one's going to do that, right? So just all I would encourage before I drop off is just thinking it from their perspective, which is absolutely different than what the future of text is and what reader is and what author is, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Alan. Their perspective is kind of a bit of a cascade from the top, where Vint and the CEO has said this needs to be done. And the publishing people completely agree. And they've said that let's trial it with this way of doing it for this thing, because it's a matter of copy and paste. It's a production job. It is not coding. It is not a logic. It's not a
But
system.
why does it need to be done? Because this needs to be done isn't the compelling event.
The benefits of this is, first of all, it is actually possible to have an academic PDF and not know the year it was published. Literally, you can download it and it's
Wow.
crazy, right? The other thing is, we talked about headings earlier. Headings are problematic for accessibility. When you're doing screen readers and when you're trying to navigate for whatever handicap or other advanced reasons, to not have those holding places is ridiculous. It's a huge detriment. And then finally, one thing that I think we can trust to a high degree is that the basic BibTeX for the document itself will be as good as the organization says it is. And even though there may be an error in there, the fact that that's what the organization says is enough for me in most cases, because it will allow you to verify it, to go back to it. Let's say that the reference section, which is a really difficult sticking point, is not in we forget about it. Let's say that the only thing we introduce is the visual meta ID, which is the hash of the document. And that is what becomes used for citations in the future. That in itself is a huge win, because it's a kind of a random number, but it's unique to the document. So it means that you don't have to have this long hierarchy of connecting documents in each document. You just have the main document with these little references.
Okay, so those are great. Those are 2 great pains. And if we start from there, it makes me wonder, and this is a bad idea, I know, but whatever. Like, if those are 2 pains, then what if the interface or the point of intervention was to allow the audience not to, of course, change the canonical text, but to add layers of identification and sort of data versioning that would remove those problems, assuming that all actors are trustworthy and intelligent. I know.
What problems do you mean in that context?
Well, just what I heard was some papers don't have dates assigned, right? So in a Wikipedia world, that would get fixed and supported and improved over time. Additionally, if there was a tool to say, hey, translate this, this is a header, right? And even I want to give it a unique hash that will exist in perpetuity, and I'm just going to go ahead and do that while I'm reading it, right? Now, again, actors being great. That's the kind of thing that would solve their problems or start to solve their problems, right? It would deal with a pain that could also move towards your own goals. Something like that. I'm not suggesting that idea, but that's the kind of thing.
In terms of sales, they are sold on this, and we are moving. The only concern is that they may want to have it for documents after the, like a post-publish or something. That I think that might be a bit stressful for us, but that's not really the issue. The issue is that they understand the benefits, and all the way through, including production, they really see the benefits. They seem to be genuinely excited by getting their house in order, so to speak. But the concern I'm having now is Adam is raising real world questions. Mark has been doing it this week too. And in order to deal with them, we have to know this. So this is really, really important. But it is, for them, it's just, you know, it's a production workflow. We just can't complicate it too much. I think that's really what it comes down to.
Excellent. I have to jump. It's been a pleasure as always.
See you later. So Adam, back to the fragilities of the system. Let's unpick this a little bit. So if we do what Peter said with that hash, or what we have before, because they're just two great solutions to the same problem. If the document has a unique ID, a hash ID or date ID or whatever, if we have a solution for that, that obviously goes a little bit towards it. But do you feel that the basic BibTeX that the producers of the document would have put on the download page, even if it has an error, has a huge benefit of being in the document? And if it has an error, just talking about that bit, how do you feel this workflow should deal with it?
I think to answer the first two questions or so, it's very useful to have the identifier. A regular BibTeX entry would be very useful to have, even if it contained errors. I completely agree with what Peter said before and Mark has said before, that it will be imperfect, but it's very useful to just have a starting point for every data gathering. So I think there should be a mechanism for querying databases, or we should think about it and frame it that way, that a way to collect updated information on those correct, and I don't think that they could, that information should probably come from some sort of database. I don't think it's wise to append too many corrections to a document after the fact, because that will break so many things in provenance. You will have, then everyone will have a different version depending on when they downloaded the document, and I don't think that's a wise idea. It would be if we would have books in that way. Of course, you have editions, and you can find out which editions you have, and some typos may be changed. But if it does that too automatic, that every single user gets a different version, or almost, that will be problematic. So I think it's more wise to have a published corrections that is not inside the document. You publish a document, and then you have either correction pages, errata pages, maybe even in PDF.
So what you're saying, Adam, is that, like we talked about an extra appendix, page 2, what you're saying is that the original publisher can issue that, and then if the software systems at the reader's end is set up, this can automatically be appended to the document.
Yep.
Or if we trust another source, like Mr. Anderson, we can choose to subscribe to his possible erratas. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Could have said that an hour ago.
Yeah, but it's in a way. We're going back to Stefan's comments before. Why do we need the vision meter anyway? We could just have the identifiers and build that database without permission, without anything, without and start with people actually doing it without asking for permission. So, and in a way, I agree with them.
There's something else actually that fits alongside the errata that sort of cropped up in conversation with Fred this week, and we didn't quite take further, but it's the notion that, again, whether we're using BibTeX or some other thing, but when you have things like references where you're basically using other people's data. So, you know, if I have the headings in my document, well, I sort of control that, I know what to know about that. But I may be quoting, you know, I may be trying to tell you that I've referenced to these things and these are where they are. One idea we did have is maybe having either a flag on the citation, or putting some citations in a separate wrapper that basically say these are sort of strict, or, you know, basically these ones work. Whereas this other lot is some crap I just happened, you know, I happen to copy off the internet that might work, I don't know. But in other words, there's a sense of validation. and it's a complex thing, and it's too early to sort of imagine it in its full fig. But it might be a sort of, or you might do it as a kind of peer review, crowdsourced thing. You know, if enough people sort of say it's kosher, it breaths over the hill.
I added it to the website as a note.
Oh, thanks.
On the main
Sorry.
page.
Yeah.
But I mean, Adam, here's the thing. Why isn't it just distributed? It's because distributions break, right? The web is a fine thing for advertising hot dogs and stuff, right? But it is so fragile as an infrastructure, it's completely useless for anything other than a couple of generations, right? So the coders, another thing that Mark and I was fighting over this week was optimization of how you list the references. I don't care. I am firmly in the camp of robustness, right? List it again and again and again. Mark is being kind to coders saying, why don't you use this way to optimize? So I think the idea of having an errata appendix opportunity is brilliant because it bridges both worlds. It means that the document is a freestanding published to the world. It exists on its own right, end of story. But just like in the physical world, if there is an errata by someone, that can be sent by email or printed by post or whatever means, any kind of system, and it can, by choice of the reader, be added or not. But to have things in a database here and a database there and a database over there, you know, it's like it's in the cloud, and one day it'll just run away.
But there are other ways of viewing it. It could be that the database is published, like Mark's data. I get a published version, so to say, over email. I get a CSV file that is mine to keep forever. So there could be other databases that are not online, but document databases as documents, and that is very useful.
Yeah, hang on, Peter, just before.
Sorry, Peter.
No. I was just saying Peter's raised his hand, but you see, Adam, you and I live in different worlds. You are a coder, and you're a very, very good one, because you also have a good sense of aesthetics. I am not a coder, right? For me, I am a normal academic, not a very good one. I'll read a document, and then I'll cite it, and I'll read another one, and I'll cite it. I'm not going to maintain or access a database to keep my documents up to date, right? That doesn't make any sense to me. But if my system happens to do that, it's one of the parts of the service, I consider that useful, right? So if you want to distribute this errata page as CSV or in a published database or as just a JSON, I don't give a monkeys about any of that. I mean, me as the co-designer of Visual Meta, I'd like to be in dialogue to make that, but as an end user, it shouldn't feel like that. I have a document, my system can update it or not, right? I saw a lot of head shaking, that's good. Yeah, Peter.
Okay, a couple thoughts. We could have multiple sources of Visual Meta and put them out in sort of like a Lynda tuple space out over the interplanetary file system or something. So you wouldn't necessarily have to be subscribing to all the possible sources. Again, you go with the content addressable mode. You're interested in any sources that are providing metadata or corrections of metadata related to this piece of content that you care about. It also brings to mind the approach that the GIS systems have taken of building up maps in terms of layers. So imagine that instead of having just, right now we have like a flat bibliography of everything, but we don't have any notion of which sources are related to what areas of interest within the document. Imagine a bibliography with layers in it so that you could expose the historical layer and then only see citations that are talking about history related topics, or you could expose or hide the technical layer. So if you're not a programmer, you're not going to be distracted by looking at a whole bunch of implementation related citations that go deep down into the weeds on how you actually build the thing. You could just see basically an abbreviated bibliography representing, you know, major trends and schools of thought and communities of discourse that the substance matter is related to. So that layer idea might be something that we might want to play with. That way, again, you can have different slices, and this easily works in visualizations, but to actually incorporate the possible views from the visualizations into the actual visual meta so that more than one visualization could make use of that. Because right now we're in a world where if you want to create, say, just the historical subset view, you'd be off in some bibliography visualization tool and you'd select your subset of citations that are related to that and take a look at them. But there's no way for that information about the subset to be passing from one visualization tool to another tool. And that's where the GIS tools really went hands down because of that notion. Okay, I'm adding the street map layer. Now I'm adding the sewage and water basin, drainage basin layer. Now I'm adding the layer with 3D models of the buildings on top. Now I'm adding the satellite photo layer. So we might want to try to think about how we can incorporate that notion into our work. And that's all I have for now.
How about we keep that on ice
Uh-huh.
at the back of the freezer for a while? I mean, there are so many amazingly fascinating things we can add like that, and we have to. But I think right now we're in, you know,
Right, we're in the make the initial sale to the big enough group to get everybody else to wake up and say, oh, they've endorsed it, so there must be something here.
Yeah, and something that really came home to me when I was, trying to do all this citation stuff, I was bouncing across, a number of large publishers. It's just basically how little there is. Most of it helps kudos surfing. So basically it's, finding my stuff. Did I get cited? The amount, and all sorts of pop-ups and drop downs and all garbage like that doesn't actually help you. And if you're actually a sort of student or you're a researcher, wanting to know, what is this thing? Where did it happen? How does it relate to this? That's something, going back to Alan's point earlier, that's something I think we're unlocking. It's early days because we can't, until there's enough of the information in the right sort of form, we can't do that. And so this and again is why Anna's beautifully timed visualizations, I think, help massively, because I certainly have done this enough. I can map what I'm seeing there to what we're doing. I know they come from different places, but that's the happy upland that I want to get to with this. And I think that is something that I think publishers also, it might motivate them because they will begin to see something they can offer that will bring people into their portal. I mean, the unknown here is, well, why are they running it at all? I mean, I know it's a business sort of thing, but it's harder to say with the ACM. I mean, they obviously have to make enough to cover the publishing costs, but otherwise, where does the extra profit go? So why should it be there? And it's nice that people like Vint are thinking, well, we should just make better stuff because we can. And that's sort of, I think that's another sort of aspect that I try and hold on to quite hard, and not, sort of not worry too much about the justification, saying, well, maybe just making it better is a good thing to do.
On that note, we have to wrap up. Edgar has been doing swim lesson all week, and we promised him he could go to our local Japanese restaurant for dinner, which is in 10 minutes. So yeah, Adam, do you feel that we're beginning to address the issue?
Yeah. I mean, it's an enormous issue, and I don't think we should engage in too much wishful thinking, but the conversation we had here today, I think is good because it can clarify many things of what we can't solve and what we can solve. And also, it's hard to come with this critique because it feels like it can be a weight. Yeah, it can kill enthusiasm. So I don't want to do that, but I want us to thread a bit carefully here to do the right thing and not put the whole world in Visual Meta, but put the good stuff in there so we can navigate the whole world.
Yeah, that's nice of you to say. And in terms of, you kill the enthusiasm, I think you all have a lot of buffer to do that because you show up. The fact that you're here, if you were moaning every week, I may have to have a chat with you. But actually implement the stuff. You're all being supremely supportive. So as I said, because I've been dealing with concepts and ACM this week, I've been a little depressed, as we all have. Nothing wrong with that. But actually fighting with you guys over this makes me much happier. So I'm very grateful because it makes it real. I'm 53, older than most of you guys. I've been in enough of those very pleasant discussions about doing something with technology to save the world, and it's all just chat, right? And when you make something real, you do remove from it. And that's the thing. When you go from what I call a concept in your head to writing it in text, you remove a lot. So writing and authoring is the act of removing. It is making a model. A model is not the whole thing. And that is exactly an analogy. So when you point out how this can go to pieces, that is extremely valuable. And, we have to address it. I mean, I think that one of the things that we have managed to do over the last few weeks together is the idea of wrappers and segmentation. We have one bit that is core and the rest of it is suggested. This is how you do it. If you add something else, it means that when it comes to parsing, we have different levels of trust of what data it is, right? So we're approaching it. But anyway, I have to go. I have to do some reading. So this arrived in the mail from Mark Anderson. I have no idea why, but it is absolutely wonderful and thoughtful. And yeah, it's such a completely different part of the world. So thank you, Mark. That was very much appreciated and wonderful of you.
Sorry, we'd had a very fractious week, and I did this by way of atonement.
The fact that you managed to get it delivered literally at the end of the call, Emily just slid it onto the table here, was highly impressive.
Have a great weekend, guys.
Yeah, you too.
Merci, Peter.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Here in the UK,
Nice
it's going to
weekend.
get a bit stormy, but it's okay. And Raphael, I hope we go into more branding and other issues next week. I think we're
Okay.
just feeling a bit trampled by the big ACM machine, which is not
No, of
necessarily-
course. Just remember for the ACM that we have to set some time aside to work on the presentation. And I'll be more than happy to do that.
Well, we tried this week and I failed you, and then you weren't available on the next one. Shall you and I just right now say 3 o'clock my time on Tuesday, as in an hour earlier than this?
Sure. Yeah. On Tuesday, I'm good.
Okay, I put it on my calendar, so let's make it happen. Okay, thanks, guys. Have a wonderful weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. See you Monday.